Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
In the budget after the election, George Osborne delighted friends and opponents, actually, by announcing the national living wage. You may recall Ian Duncan-Smith punching the air in delight. Those were the days. It was introduced this month, increasing wages for workers over 25 to £7.20, an extra 50p an hour. But some employers, faced with a higher wage bill, have withdrawn or appear to have withdrawn perks and overtime payments. So how can the government make a real impact on low pay?
Britain deserves a pay rise, and Britain is getting a pay rise. I am today introducing a new national living wage.
The Chancellor is saying he was proud Britain now had one of the highest living wages levels in the world. But if he expected that to be universally welcomed, he could not have been more wrong.
He's increased the minimum wage, but he hasn't introduced a proper living wage.
Lots of the people who we're talking about, they work hard, they work Sundays, they work bank holiday Mondays, and nobody hears their voice.
That is how we build a higher wage, lower welfare, lower tax society that Britain needs.
Well, George, let's begin with you. What is your reaction when you see this? You've introduced this. What do you make of companies when they appear not to be going through with the spirit of it?
Well, it makes me angry. I mean, one of the things I'm proudest of in the years I've been doing this job is introducing a national living wage. You know, as the economy recovered, we had to make sure that everyone benefited. And it's just come into effect this month. And it means, you know, a big pay rise, a £900 pay rise for a low-paid person. Now, we've got laws that make sure, you know, you've got to pay that per hour. Indeed, today, we're tripling the budget of the enforcers who make sure the law is enforced, and companies can be taken to court if they don't pay that living wage. But of course, what you get is some companies cutting the lunch break or cutting the free lunch they were provided, or you know, and that is not, you know, that is not.
What do you
I would
say
say
to
that
them?
that may not be the letter of the law, and we don't, you know, in this country prescribe exactly what everyone eats for lunch. But it is not the spirit of the law, and I think companies these days should be much more careful about their reputation and much more aware of their social responsibility to their workforce as well as their community.
But what do you, as Chancellor, say to them? You are the Chancellor. You keep telling us how much you've cut corporation tax and all the rest of it. You have done a lot, as you would say, for corporate Britain. I mean, does this feel like a kick in the teeth? What would you say to them personally?
Well, look, we've cut business taxes so they employ more people and pay better wages. I mean, that's why we've done it. And I would say they are not following these companies. And look, they are the exception, not the rule. The vast majority of companies, have enthusiastically welcomed the new national living wage, are paying it.
Some big names have been accused of doing this.
Yeah, but some companies aren't doing it. I think...
And you don't doubt that it's happening? Because there's some suggestion, oh, well, we were going to change this.
There are examples of companies that used to provide a free lunch and have cancelled it and so on. I think they are being outed. They're, with the fact we're discussing on a programme like this, the fact they're on your news programme, Tom, that is all a way of shaming some of these companies into doing the right thing. And as I say, we can all think of the names. There are companies who have had a terrible time in the press, and that's affected what they sell if they're interested in the bottom line, because they haven't behaved responsibly. And companies are no different from people in our society. We've got responsibilities and they should abide by them. We've done our bit as a government and as a parliament. We've set the law on the new national living wage, and we will, as I say, enforce the letter of the law, but we want the companies to also live by the spirit of the law.
Well, Grace, maybe I can bring you in here, because you spend, you're a restaurant critic amongst other things. You spend a lot of time in places, where people don't pay their staff necessarily all that much. What do you make of...
I'm absolutely furious about this. I'm glad that you're angry too. I am absolutely furious. I think it's just to give with one hand and take with the other is completely wrong. And I am not completely into Twitter shaming. I think we take it too far sometimes. But with these big companies, they need to be shamed. I think that if you are working so hard all day, the very least that... Am I allowed to say who have done this? No, I'm not.
Well, we'll unravel it with the lawyers later, partly because they're all so...
Exactly,
they all have their own defence, and, it's hard to disaggregate it.
But if you are, say, working 10 hours a day, running a very, very difficult environment, you know, dealing with customers. I think the very least that they can do is maybe give you one of their sandwiches. And to take that away, just to me seems wrong. We need to be, you know, we've got this wonderful growing hospitality industry in this country. Whatever you want to say about industry in this country, hospitality is thriving, and we need to incentivise people staying in these jobs, and giving them a sandwich is the least we can do.
Martin, was this the right measure, do you think? If you want to increase low pay and make sure people actually get a better reward, which almost every politician does, is this the right measure to do it?
I certainly think it was a good measure increasing pay, and I think this is a short-term trivial point, not to the people who work there, but you know, pay will always reach an equilibrium. When this is happening, companies will either make staff terms and conditions worse, they'll try not to decrease their profits, or they will increase their cost to customers. And all of those things are going to happen at this initial point. But they can't keep doing this every time as the national living wage rises again and again. So hopefully, thankfully don't have an inflationary worry at the moment, because it could cause inflation, but that isn't really an issue. So hopefully it will feed through. But I do have to say one thing on this. When I first heard you do this, when I was watching the budget, when you announced this, you stole the name living wage from the Living Wage Foundation. Your national living wage for over 25s is £7.20. The Living Wage Foundation, and we're a living wage employer, when we have interns we pay them London living wage, that's £9.20. It's £8.25 outside of London. You call the living wage £7.20. In reality, it's just a minimum wage for over 25s. I'm delighted you've increased it, so that's a good thing. But it is a bit like saying, I've just invented these amazing corn cereal things that are golden made, and we're going to call them Kellogg's Cornflakes. The living wage wasn't yours. You should have called it another name. It was a
Not that
little
anyone
naughty.
like a supermarket has ever done that.
Isn't it going up?
It's going up, and it'll be.
But it's not the same as the living wage. So theirs will go up too.
Well, hold on, it's not the same as the London living wage. But, you know, that's because I think if you applied the London living wage in some parts of the country, you'd get a lot of people losing their job.
London wage is £8.25.
Martin, I'm trying to balance, you know, giving people a great job and making sure they're getting fairly paid with people not losing their jobs. And that's the balance, I think. And by the way, the number we used was actually a left-wing think tank, which you'll know, called the Resolution Foundation. They gave us some advice on how to pitch that level so that we got the balance right.
Okay, Alison, hold on a sec. Can I just bring in Alison?
Yeah, well, I think it's really... I cheered when George announced that. Don't always cheer everything George announces. But 13 million people in this country are living in poverty, and half of those are working households. So that shows you, this isn't people lying about on the settee watching Jeremy Kyle. This is people actually getting up, doing the thing they're supposed to do. So I think the more money we can get to them, the better. And I also think, I agree with Grace, I think it's absolutely disgraceful, these companies. As I understand it, George, in another kind and unexpected gesture, cut corporation tax from 28% to 17%. Coming into effect in 2020, and that gives companies 15 billion tax windfall, and you would think they might like to give that to some of the people who work hard to make the profits.
Can I just ask you, I think you've written about this, but certainly others have, the possibility that this will increase our attractiveness for people coming into this country, immigration and so on, that it will act as a pull factor. Do you worry about that, or do you think that's overstated?
I do worry about that. I worry also that it's George introduced it for only over 25s. I think that young people 16 to 24 are in quite a lot of trouble with fees and all sorts of things. Yeah, I do worry. I think in Lithuania, £7.20 an hour is an awful lot, and I worry we'll be getting more of those people coming over and taking jobs from our young people. We've got an awful lot of young people unemployed, hence Brexit, you see.
We'll come to that in a moment. Does anyone else think, do any of you worry about the possibility of this acting as a pull factor for more people?
I just think, if you want to address migration, then put a brake on welfare, make sure, you know, British youngsters are getting the right skills to get these jobs, but don't, underpay the British workforce as your migration policy. I don't think that would be very sensible.
No.
Okay. Let's finish off this then. Is the general sense that this is the right policy, or are there other policies that they should be considering that would more directly, or in addition to this, add to making people better able to support themselves?
You can't look at this in policy isolation, but I think as a policy on its own, it is a good policy. Trying to increase people's wages to something that they can live off is always going to be worthwhile. And as I say, of course, none of us like the way the companies are playing games with this initially, but they can't, if you do increase the national living wage time and time again. They can't do this every time. They only have certain things that they're able to cut, and after that they start to become non-compliant, and you should batter them down with a ton of bricks if they do at that point. So overall, I think it will increase wages, and at the moment, thankfully, we don't have an inflationary problem, particularly, that's going to push it in. So it's actually a rather good time to be doing it.
Actually, well, most companies who have, happily implemented this policy, most companies understand that if you have a well-paid, well-motivated workforce, that is good for the bottom line. It's good for the company as well as good for the workforce. And, it's actually one of the ways of making our whole economy more productive.
OK, maybe a final word to Grace. Were you surprised the government introduced this?
I was surprised, and I absolutely love it, what they've done. But I feel that these companies, they need to be aware if they're coming across as a bit spiteful.
Better repeat that. George doesn't hear that all that often. The absolutely I love it bit.
I loved it. But I think that these large corporations, they need to be aware that they're coming across to people like me as spiteful. It doesn't look like a financial decision.
But
it
do
looks
you
as
think
if they're
Ed Miliband
furious.
then had a point when he said there was something wrong with corporate Britain? Is it time to stop rewarding and add a few more sticks to the way they're treated?
There is something wrong with corporate Britain. We all know that.
Not all of corporate Britain.
Some of corporate
Britain. Even I bash banks more than anybody else that's going out there and run massive financial injustice campaigns. But we shouldn't generalise about anybody, and there are good employers and bad employers.
Yes.
And what we should do is bash the bad ones, not bash them all as a collective. But I do have to say, when you start to look at what happens here, I don't actually think this will cause brand damage. I think that people disconnect between what they see in the news about the way a company behaves and when they're on the high street buying their cup of coffee or whatever it is. It doesn't actually stop most people.
OK.
I think it will grow too.
OK, let's tempting, but a different subject.
I've been getting